Hello everyone, my name is Trainmaster GT, and welcome to my Trainz M120 module build series. So this is my very first M120 episode in Trainz 2019, and this is a pretty cool development because there's all sorts of cool new features in Trainz 2019 which I will be able to make use of in this module and future modules. There are brand new TBR textures which look really nice on an in-game, and there are Turf X grass, which I will talk about that more later, and there's also some brand new built-in content which for multiplayer purposes is really amazing. A lot of it's like really nice joined rail stuff, so there's all sorts of cool new things with this version of the game which really excites me for the purposes of just route construction. So I wanted to build a route that would allow me to make use of, at the very least, the new locomotives and rolling stock in the game. And I wanted to do something that was international, because I've pretty much only used US rolling stock at this point, but I also wanted to do something I was still fairly used to. So I had to get a little bit creative, and I went with Canada, the Great White North, because there's all sorts of amazing jointed rail Canadian locomotives just built into the game, including GP9s and a few other more modern diesels, and they all look really good. But I couldn't just do just generic Canadian route, because A, that would just be kind of a cop-out. It wouldn't have been as interesting as my last couple of videos. It would kind of just look like a long lake, but without the interesting logging stuff. So I decided I had to do a sort of an interesting innovation for this. So I decided to make a hump yard. So for those of you who don't know, a hump yard is a type of railway sorting yard in which freight cars are pushed up over a elevated bit of track known as a hump, which is what I'm actually working on camera right now, and then they're pushed down the hump, uncoupled from the train, and then they just kind of roll down using gravity, and then are switched onto the track, which would attach them to the train that they're supposed to be attached to. So the railways do this because it means that they are way more fuel and time efficient. Instead of having to have a locomotive sort each car onto a track individually, which takes way more time and way more fuel, they can just have the gravity do most of the work. So the engine still has to push everything up a hill, but pushing 100 cars up a hill is probably easier than putting 100 cars each individually on their own track in a siding. So it makes sorting trains quicker, and it means that the railways get to be way more efficient. So here I'm actually kind of working on getting my hump set up in a manner which looks good. I'm just trying to get everything in approximately a decent position. I need to be far enough away from the main line that it's not going to be causing any issues with terrain height, but it also needs to be far enough away from the other edge of the module so I can sneak past a couple of tracks and get around the yard. I need to make sure that there's a relief track so that trains can actually escape from what they're doing. So here I'm starting to set up the sort of switches hump side, and I'm kind of realizing here that I had not left enough room between the hump tracks I'd set up and the actual hump itself, so I'm adding a little bit more room. If your curves are too aggressive and your junctions are too aggressive, they really do not look that good, like, at all. So I need to make sure that my little junctions look good by making sure they have plenty of room to breathe. And I'm actually end up removing a couple of tracks because there just wasn't enough room to make it look good. So I end up going with, I believe there's 12 tracks total in the final yard. And then I have it divided up into 4 kind of switch triplets. So that's kind of a common thread amongst actual hump yards I've looked at, to have like actual little triples like that. So now what I'm doing is I'm implementing the retarders. So what retarders do is they slow down the freight cars as they're rolling down the hump. So that way, when the freight cars do end up bumping into their train, they don't completely wreck anything. So, you know, if a train hits another train too fast, it'll, you know, cause an accident, and that's not really what we want to have happen. So the retarders play an important role in making sure that there are no accidents in the hump yard. So what I'm doing here is I'm placing my back end retarders. Now these retarders will completely stop the freight cars as they roll into the yard, so that the trains will not roll out onto the main line. And then what I'm going to do here is place in a second crossover. I need to do the yard ladder on the back end of the hump yard, but before I can do that I need to make sure that I've got all my other tracks in place, and that the tracks on this end are long enough to hold a complete train. Now there are two reasons for this. First, I need to make sure that there's enough room so that freight trains can actually wait to exit the yard without blocking any of the yard switches. And the reason for this is so that we can fit more trains in the yard and have exiting trains not impede any switching operations. The second reason is actually due to the switching operations. Sometimes I will actually want to make sure that I can sort freight cars onto different tracks than maybe where the hump sorts them. The way the hump we're using works is it just kind of randomly sorts the freight cars. There is a way to set them up so that it'll sort certain freight car types onto certain tracks, I believe, but I'm not entirely sure how that works. So there might be times when we just want to grab a string of, you know, coal cars on the end of one of the humps and just bring it to all one track, for example. This will just give operations a little bit more flexibility, and it will make everything just run a little bit smoother. So now we're entering the incredibly tedious process of actually building the yard ladder. Now, this is probably the slowest part of the video, and you're watching this sped up 8 times. So it took a really long time to do this, and it was kind of fiddly. The thing is, I wanted to make sure that the curvatures looked good. I wanted to make sure that all of the trains would not be like clipping into each other while they were going around the corners. You know, I had to make sure that these curves were fairly tight so that everything could fit in the module. You know, after all, part of the point of M120 modules is to keep everything fairly small, but I also had to make sure that it didn't look terrible. You know, one problem with sort of miniaturizing something that would normally be huge, like a hump yard, is that it can kind of have a tendency to make things look forced and just weird in that smaller space. And I didn't really want to have that be an issue, because, you know, this is a cool project when everything actually works. So you're going to see in the cinematics at the end of the video, before it even has any of the scenery detail in, that this is just awesome to see in operation, but I don't want it to look weird. So I want to make sure I'm spending the proper amounts of time and just crossing our T's, dotting our I's, and making everything just look good. And right there I had to delete some junctions. When you delete a switch in Trainz, the switch asset, the actual junction, which you would actually use to change the direction of the track in game, doesn't automatically delete with it. So you have to go through and manually delete the levers after the fact. So now what I'm trying to do is create a track, a relief track next to the main yard ladder. And I should have done this first, but there is a pretty nifty technique where you can use where if you have your previous sort of yard stub, you can use a ruler to get the exact same direction of that track and have it run at the exact same angle, so you can have everything run parallel. Here I'm actually using rulers again to measure the distance between the outer rail of the yard ladder switch and the outer rail of the relief track to make sure everything is at the same distance. And I actually use the same trick again over here, just again, I want to add a lot of relief tracks so you can have multiple people working in the yard at the same time. And this ruler trick, I learned it building a yard in a single player route that I was making for myself a couple months ago, and it just helped me make that yard look so much better. Without learning this trick, I do not think this module would have ended up looking as good as it does. So yeah, you definitely use rulers when you can. They're a little bit weird to work with, but once you know how to use them, they are a lifesaver. So one of the things I wanted to do with the relief track was actually add a little bit of an engine service facility. When you've got trains running into a big yard, they're probably going to be, you're going to have some trains terminating. Not everything would just run straight through the yard. So we want to make sure we have a little bit of an engine facility area. So here what I'm doing is adding in an extra junction so that if you want to have some trains idling, you can. And then I'm going to add in a engine facility here in a couple of seconds. Here we go. So I looked through all of the sheds in the game, and I ended up having to use a jointed rail shed. Now, this one has a giant Norfolk Southern sign on it, so that's a little bit weird since we're in Canada, okay? And so I'm a little bit annoyed by that, but I couldn't find a sign big enough to cover up the Norfolk Southern part of it, and I don't think I'm actually legally allowed to reskin the building and release it on the DLS, so we're just gonna have to live with a little Norfolk Southern, but that's okay. It's still a good looking building, and it works for the purpose of the module here. So now I'm running the actual tracks through the shed. Now some shed assets and trains actually have the tracks built in. This JR shed does not, so I had to sort of get the shed and the tracks all set up separately. And I'm actually going to end up building another yard ladder here. And it's not the same type of yard ladder. This is just to make sure that all my junctions are at about the same angle. When you've got a lot of tracks, it just makes sense to use this, and you're switching over them, it makes sense to use the yard ladder tactic that we just used for building the yard, even though this is just a shed track. It makes all your switches look better. So the next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to add in a couple of extra yard tracks after I finish up adding in these junctions. And these are just extra, like the tracks for idling locomotives, maybe just locomotives that are ready for work, or maybe for just storing a boxcar full of parts. There's not necessarily a reason for these tracks to be here other than storage. You know, you do need some storage in multiplayer sessions because you're going to have a lot of just extra trains and cars that you maybe don't have anything to do with. So you want to make sure that there's room so that you can actually put those somewhere. And here I'm adding a second relief track. You know, it's very important that you have plenty of ways of allowing trains to get around each other, otherwise that'll cause clogs, and you really do not want your main line, and you do not want your important switching areas to get clogged up during a multiplayer session, because it can be much harder to untangle that knot than it is to just make sure that nothing's going to get tangled up in the first place. And likewise, here I'm adding in a bit of a, not a relief track, but a extra siding so that trains going up the hump can have extra room to for their cars. We don't want trains to go onto the main line when they're using the hump if we can avoid it. So this track literally just exists to give trains plenty of room on the hump. So there's only about a minute left in the time lapse here, and I'm going to take this opportunity to thank you very much for watching. Because of the size of this module, I am not going to have time to finish everything in this episode. So next episode we'll be doing all the scenery for this module, and you know, it is going to look absolutely amazing once it is done. I've already finished building it. It's already recorded, so it's going to be out fairly soon after the release of this video. So I hope you very much enjoyed this build. If you would like to support the channel, please leave a like, a comment, and subscribe. Other than that, I will see you next time. Thank you, take care, and goodbye. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. you can follow me on Instagram at TrainmasterGT. There is no route download with this video because, well, the route's incomplete, but you will be able to play with this in the next episode, so make sure to subscribe and hit that bell so you can see it when it's released. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.